Today, we're going to be deep diving into the Nightcrawler hero from Marvel Champions. We're going to be analyzing his cards, talking about the different aspects he plays in, rank him in the overall ranking of Marvel Champions villain, and just to call out, this will be primarily a solo-focused review. But we will talk about multiplayer thoughts towards the end of the video. But as we're going through this, and until I say this is for multiplayer, it's all through a true solo lens. So let's dive in and start out on his alter ego side. In alter ego, Kurt follows the mold of our last hero, Jubilee, with 9 health, 6 hand size, and a 3 recovery. So already we're kind of thinking that he's going to be a bit squishy, but don't worry because we're going to be talking about that a little bit more soon. He does have a pretty awesome ability that allows him to search his deck for a copy of the Bamf upgrade and add it to his hand. Now we will talk more about the specifics of Bamf when we flip to the hero side, but I do want to take a second to talk about how this can accelerate his tempo. A lot of the time we can use this to grab a Bamf for the card itself. We really like Bamf on the table, but it can also be viewed as a +1 hand size when you're in alter ego. So if we start the game, or even like a following turn when we flip down, a 7 hand size, which can get your engine up and running very quickly. You draw the 6, get a Bamf for 7. And in true solo, that can be a huge tempo boost, especially when the villains come out and hit you really hard. You need a lot of answers for a lot of these expert villains, and Nightcrawler can provide that with a 7 hand size starting out. And that's not the only way we're able to get card acceleration in alter ego. We have his Chapel support, which gives him +1 recovery, and then it says after you recover, you can choose a player to have them draw a card. In true solo, you're always going to choose yourself, which makes it a bit easier to stomach when using a recovery action on healing. I try and avoid using my action or my basic activation for healing in true solo. I view that as kind of a tempo loss, so if we get a card in as like the reward for recovering, we get benefited a little bit for recovering, it's really nice. And in multiplayer, moving a little section up here, there are some really fun support builds that thing leading into this that use the recovery action to pass out cards to other players. But back to true solo. When we flip the card to hero form, we have a unique to Marvel Champions stat line: 2 thwart, 1 attack, 3 defense. Usually when we see that 3 defensive stat, we have a 2 attack and 1 thwart, where those are flipped on Nightcrawler. And that's awesome. We have a printed action on the hero card that's called Rapid Teleportation that says you can spend a resource to pull a copy of Bamf from your discard pile back to your hand. And I promise we're going to be talking about Bamf here very soon, but let's talk a little bit more about this stat line. The 2 thwart is super great for true solo, especially with his ability to be ready even after defending an attack. Not only do we have a really sweet stat line to mitigate villain activations, we have a really cool upgrade called Kurt's Cutlasses, which is actually one of my preview cards, which was kind of fun. The Cutlery, which is what we've been calling it on my channel, is really insane value for 1 2-cost card. It gives Nightcrawler +1 attack, +1 defense, and retaliate. So not only does the stat line jump to a 2/2/4 with just the cards inside of his own kit, he gets some seriously needed damage with the retaliate, which is great because of how frequently Kurt is going to be defending. And this is where I fulfill my promise to you all. Let's talk about the Bamf upgrade. Nightcrawler has 3 of these 0-cost Bamf upgrades, and this is the card we talked about earlier that Kurt's alter ego can grab and the hero action can grab. We're here. Bamf attaches to an enemy and states that you can interrupt the attached enemy's attack to discard Bamf and declare Nightcrawler the defender of the attack without exhausting him. This can work if he's already exhausted or if he's ready, but you do not have to exhaust him. This is why that retaliate is so important. Nightcrawler loves to defend, with the ability to get up to 4 defense, and he can do so multiple times every single round. That retaliate is going to pay for itself so much. That being said, we need to talk about Bamf, because I'm not sure you want to use it whenever you can. And that is because so many of Nightcrawler's events trigger off Bamf as an additional cost. And so I think the decision to use Bamf is a little bit more tactical and not as straightforward as I initially thought it was going to be. So let's take Port and Punch for example. This is his 2-cost attack event that deals 3 damage and then 3 damage to every single enemy with Bamf attached. We do not have to discard Bamf to trigger this ability, but it is a conditional cost for the event. So like I don't want to be playing a hero attack that does 2 for 3. So if I don't have a Bamf out, 2 for 3 is very inefficient. We want to have at least one out there to get to 6 damage, and then we're looking at a 3 effective cost for 6 damage, which is on curve. And then this is another cost we just need to consider, especially because this is one of the 3 attack events Nightcrawler has in his kit. So if we do not have a Bamf on the table, we're probably using rapid teleportation to get it onto an enemy. So we're actually really looking at like a 4 effective resource cost for the damage. Now, we do get the benefit of having Bamf out on the table, so the 4 effective resource cost is not a perfect way to look at it, but it is eating up your resources and reducing your flexibility. But going back to my last note, what if we just kept Bamf on the villain from the previous turn and either basic defended or chump blocked or status locked the villain? Then we did not have to use Bamf to declare ourselves as the defender. Then you play Port and Punch. So keeping Bamf out allows Nightcrawler to be more flexible in the resources he gets to use, which is the key to success in true solo, maintaining flexibility. So we could have defended using Bamf on the previous turn and been ready to thwart or attack during our turn, or we could exhaust to basically prevent the spending of the resource Bamf and put it back onto the table so we can get full utilization out of our events. What's the right answer here? I have no idea. It will be different turn to turn and game to game, but my rule of thumb is that if I can find another way to block the attack, I will, whether that's going to be with a chump block, using my, or if like my hand / resource pools dictates that it would be better to exhaust to defend. I've started looking at Bamf as more of a backup option / a panic button for when the villain gets that extra activation, so I don't have to worry about trying to get it back onto the table. It can be a little clunky getting it onto the table, and so once it's there, if we don't have to discard it and we can still maintain our tempo and keep it on the table, we're going to be better off down the line. And I'm very curious how you have been using Bamf to operate in your games. Are you triggering it every round? Are you using it more like a backup like I kind of am? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to chat about it because this is one of the things that took the biggest strategic shift for me to understand how to use these Bamfs. But I saw someone describe it as like Valkyrie's Deathglow and like being one of those conditional cards that you need out in order to trigger your events. I thought that was a really good comparison. I think Bamf is better than Deathglow, but it is something that you have to have. And so if you don't have to discard it, don't. That was a wild tangent. So let's get back to the last thing I want to say about Port and Punch before we move on. This can be an insane minion clear, right? If you have 3 copies of Bamf out, either in like a multi-villain scenario or you have a ton of minions on the table, this can get up to 12 damage for a printed cost of 2, which is pretty awesome. And if I can clear minions with this, I 100% will. Kurt's biggest weakness is dealing with minions and throwing damage, so I try not to pass on playing this or the next event we're going to talk about most of the game, because every single instance of damage, Kurt needs it. The next attack event we're going to be talking about is Teleport Drop. It's a 2-cost attack event that says to discard a copy of Bamf from an enemy, deal 8 damage to it, and stun them. Thematically, this card is awesome. Like, poof up, drop them, that's just cool. And then this is also some much needed villain damage. Now, with a Port and Punch, you're looking at probably 6 damage on the villain, 3 damage, and then 3 damage again for the Bamf. 8 damage is what I would classify as villain damage, and we got 1 copy of this card. We need it, right? It's effectively a 3 cost because you do have to toss Bamf. You have to discard Bamf. So this is on curve for damage, and you get an additional stun. My only complaint about this card is that there's only 1 of them in his kit. So unless I'm running a perfect defense protection against like a scenario with very few minions, and therefore I would not want the stun so I can trigger all my upgrades, I try and play this every single time it cycles through my hand, because that 8 damage is so critical when you need to push damage. The next card in his kit is Scout Ahead, his thwarting event. I really like this 1-cost card. It allows you to remove 3 threat from a scheme, which is a great number to remove as a true solo player. A lot of side schemes come in with 3, but there is a panic button that you can press that allows you to discard a copy of Bamf from your hand to remove 3 threat from another scheme. So you can like clear the main and then clear a side or a player side scheme, because most of those come in with 3. I very rarely remove additional threats by discarding a Bamf. Usually I have enough with his base 2 thwart stat plus the base 3 that this removes that I don't really have to, but it is a nice option when we do need it. And so I do like that you have it. It's a flexible option, which is nice. I think the next card, Port Away, is one of the most fun cards in his kit. It's a 0-cost event that makes you discard a Bamf from your hand, allows you to change forms and ready your identity. This does have the additional cost of discarding the Bamf, so it's kind of like a 1-cost card, but you do get a free ready, which is super nice, and you get to flip forms. There are very few heroes in this game that have access to a free flip, and when you have that sweet mutant trait printed on your alter ego, you get access to all of those mutant supports without having to stay in alter ego. So this is really nice if you're not running like a confused lock build where you don't have an answer for that activation, or if you are running protection, and he does love to run protection, so good, then you don't have to stay in alter ego. You can come down, trigger your supports, flip back up, and then be in hero so that the villain can attack you and he can trigger everything. I do like using this card to flip down, potentially grab a Bamf using our alter ego ability, or recover with a Chapel and get another card draw. It's a fun card. It's a really, really fun card. Nightcrawler has another upgrade in his kit, his tail. The 1-cost upgrade allows you to have an extra restricted card out, which is really nice because the cutlery takes up both of our normal restricted slots, but we can also exhaust this card to generate a wild resource for an event. 1-cost resource generators are awesome, even though it is a conditional resource generator in that it can only trigger off of playing events. That's great because there are very few times I want to pass on playing a Nightcrawler event. So this is a great card. It's not even restricted to his own event. It can pay for any event. So unlike X-Gene, it can pay for any event, but there are very few times I'm passing on one of his events that this could pay for where I wouldn't just use it. And a kit would not revolve around a specific card if there were not cool ways to recur it, which Kurt has a few outside of his printed abilities on his identity card, like Tally Ho. This is a 1-cost defense event that states you after you use Bamf to make Nightcrawler the defender of an attack, you can return that Bamf to your hand and deal 3 damage to the attacking enemy. Incredibly good value. The printed cost of 1 is a very true cost here because you are getting a card back into your hand, and on a subsequent turn you won't have to spend the resource to pull it back from your discard pile, and you're not losing the ability of Bamf. So you're already have been declared the defender of the attack, then you get Bamf back. So this can be evaluated as a 1-cost for 3 damage, which is pretty good value. It can be nice to clear out minions, but I also just really like using this to push a little bit more damage to the villain. It's because, again, we need that damage whenever we can get it. And then finally, the last card in his kit that we're talking about, and the last card in his kit, is his signature ally, Day Tripper. This is a 2-cost ally with some incredible value. First off, her stats are amazing for a 2-cost card. 2 thwart, 2 attack, 2 health. Awesome. A lot of the time I find myself actually using her activation to do damage because, again, threat mitigation is Kurt's strong suit, so we need to be pushing damage when we can, and we don't necessarily need to rely on that 2 thwart to help thwart or manage threat at the table, which is what a lot of heroes in True Solo need to be doing. So I'm finding myself more and more using her activation for damage rather than threat. Then she takes 1 damage, 2 health, then you can immediately block with her. She's also a great target for a recursion strategy because her when entering play response allows you to search your deck and discard pile for a copy of Bamf and attach it to an enemy, then deal 1 damage to each enemy with a Bamf attached. So she comes in, throws Bamfs out, deals damage, attacks, and then finally soaks an attack. That's a lot of value, but it's every enemy with Bamf attached. So if you have all 3 Bamfs out, it's 3 additional damage, which is awesome. Super great ally that is balanced out a little bit by not having that coveted X-Men trait on her, but Day Tripper is such an amazing signature ally. I love her. She's awesome. Really great. Let's transition and talk about Nightcrawler's cost curve. Nightcrawler has a very, very low average with only 5 cards costing over 1 and 4 0-cost cards. He has the 3rd lowest cost curve in the game with 1.07 resource cost per card. Now this is a little bit of a deceptive cost curve because of the phantom cost of discarding Bamfs and using Bamfs and all of that. But that being said, low cost curves are fun because of the flexibility it opens up in deck building. You can keep it low and play a ton of cards every single round. Like if you just flood with low cards, you're just doing a ton of stuff and it's a lot of fun. Or you can use your deck build to push that cost curve a little bit to the right, skewing the cost per card up, and adding a lot of high cost, high impact cards to keep your tactical options open so you can play those bombs when needed. So a lot of my builds, I've been using the flexibility to run some of the higher cost attack events like Take That or Waylay to shore up some of the Nightcrawler's weaknesses, and then I also have the flexibility to just play his signature cards, which are all low cost, or if I need to, I can dump my hand into a 7 attack, Take That. So there's a lot of options in deck building, and that's one of the things that I think Kurt really is awesome at, is he shakes up the deck building meta quite a bit because of how his kit is, and his strengths are typically the weaknesses of other heroes, and so it kind of flips his deck building on head. So really cool. Now let's talk about some of those deck building cards, some of the basic cards that I like to run with Kurt. These are the great cards that typically find their way into most of my deck builds. First up, we're going to talk about resource generators, talking about X-Gene or Def Focus. I like X-Gene a little bit more than Def Focus here because it can pay for Tally-Ho. Def Focus is an action, so you cannot take it during the villain's turn. X-Gene is a resource, so you can. And the only thing that that Def Focus can trigger is the tail that X-Gene cannot pay for, because X-Gene is limited to events. But that being said, I don't hate builds that run both of these, right? These are cheap resource generators. Kurt has a lot of inexpensive cards, and so if you can just use these generators to play your cards, it's nice to have the option to have multiple of these out. If I had to pick one, I am typically running X-Gene though. Next up, Specialized Training. I really like Specialized Training here because I can grab Defense Specialist, which gives him a +1 defense, and because you are going to be able to clear it pretty easily with Scout Ahead and a basic Thwart, you can get that Defensive Specialist out really easily, +1 defense, and you get basically a +1 card draw because there are very few rounds in which I am not defending with Nightcrawler. Also, I like the flexibility because there have been games where I've audibled mid-game, cleared this, and instead grabbed the attack training card to get more damage to help fill that hole. And with the cutlery and the attack training, now we're at a 3 attack, and now kind of our damage problem is a little bit mitigated. In the same vein as Specialized Training, Superpower Training, get the cutlery out. It's really good. If we can get it out early, game is going to be better. So I typically am running a Superpower Training to grab that. If I see Kurt's Cutlasses in my opening hand, then I'll use Superpower Training to grab the tail, or worst case scenario, Bamf. At that point, I'm probably just throwing it out there and just letting it ride. Utopia is really good for any X-Men character. And I usually don't talk about Utopia because I'm usually running Utopia in all of my X-Men builds, but I wanted to call it out here because I really like Utopia because of its ability to allow Nightcrawler to exhaust to defend, therefore keeping a Bamf on the villain, and then getting a ready in the hero phase when you play an X-Men ally. So Utopia increases my options to keep Bamf on the table while still being able to use that sweet 2 thwart or to attack in the hero phase. Now, there are times where I will still use the Bamf, and then I will use 2 basic activations, because I can attack, play an X-Men ally, use Utopia, ready, and then thwart. That's nice. Really, Utopia is incredible flexibility here. Mutant Education is an alter ego event that allows you to shuffle up to 2 signature cards back into your deck. And this is something that I've found to be very helpful. You can choose to shuffle Day Trippers or Bamfs that you can then grab while you're in alter ego. But what I've really enjoyed here is getting that extra copy of Port and Punch or Teleport Drop each deck pass can be a game winner. 3 attack events. 3, unless you've added more. And so if we can hit those multiple times every single time we cycle through our deck, very, very strong. Endurance, any hero that has 9 HP will probably appreciate more health, and that remains true even though Kurt is one of the best defenders in our game. Kurt can fall apart when there are too many minions on the table and he cannot defend all of them. And since he lacks damage, when a minion comes out, it typically stays out a while, so this additional health can be so good to buy us some time until we find an answer to delete that minion. And then finally, the last card we're going to talk about here is Target Acquired. And this is mainly if you're playing Standard 3. And we'll talk a little bit later in the video about Nightcrawler's Nemesis, but it sucks. Azazel comes in with Quick Strike for 3 damage, and then the side scheme deals an extra encounter card. So if Pursued by the Past triggers during a boost effect, it can be game ending because Azazel is going to come in, attack you twice in a row, once from the Quick Strike, then once from the normal minion activation, then you're going to get an extra encounter card because you had a hazard come into play before you check to see if there are hazards. So target acquired can cancel a boost effect. So anything that delays getting Azazel coming into play, I'm going to use the card. So I don't just wait until it's built up to 3 counters on Pursued by the Past. If a boost effect adds a counter, I'm canceling it. And I do see this Nemesis set quite frequently because of Kurt's lack of damage. The games tend to go on a bit longer than the average, meaning that there's a greater and greater chance of Pursued by the Past triggering. So let's try and not let that happen. So I have found target acquired to be so good in Kurt. Okay, let's rank the aspects in terms of what he is least good in to what he is best in. And I think this is going to be a little surprising to some. In 4th place, we have Justice. Justice is good at what Kurt is good at and lacks damage, which is what Kurt needs. That being said, he can be so good at threat removal that you can easily run like a one way or another build and play a ton of cards because his cost curve is so low. And you probably want to look at like Turn the Tide, which is just uber efficient damage. And Kurt is not going to have issues clearing the threat and being able to hit that triggering condition. So there are ways to play Justice. He's really good in Justice. It's just outshined by the other 3. The 3rd place is the surprise. I have Protection in 3rd place. Kurt is amazing at Protection, don't get me wrong. It's my favorite way to play him, and it's probably his best aspect in multiplayer. But in true solo, Protection gets outshined by the other 2 aspects. And I like running a perfect defense with Kurt. He's really good at them. You get to trigger all of your upgrades, you take no damage, you use Angel's Area to heal any damage you do sustain from those pesky minions. But why this isn't the top of my list is the lack of burst damage. So damage is slow to come in Kurt's kit, and damage is slow to come in the perfect defense build. A lot of the times in the perfect defense build, I will maintain like a swinging web kick in Spider-Man to deal 8 damage, and that's a huge chunk of damage. We have 1 of those, whereas Spider-Man has 3. So damage is slow coming. And if we're going to look at longer games than normal, then we're going to see our Nemesis set or other encounter deck RNG that is just going to shut us down. And so the longer the games go in true solo is notoriously very swingy, right? So the longer the games go, the more option or the more likelihood we are going to be hitting one of those huge swing events. And it's a slow hero with a slow build, and I think that's why the other 2 outshine it. I also think that Protection is potentially the hardest aspect to pilot for Kurt because of how much you want to use BAM for the ability versus how much you want to keep it on the table for the extra damage. It's just interesting. It's fun. It's very, very fun. Don't get me wrong. He's amazing in green. He's very fun in green, but I think the other 2 are a little bit stronger. And that brings us to 2nd place, which is Aggression. Red is the damage aspect, and that's what we need to add into Nightcrawler. It's also the best aspect to deal with minions, which is what cuts Kurt apart. So I really like Aggression here. You can load him up with smaller events or go all out with like a Hone Technique build, knowing you can hit that kicker with his tail on the table, lock and load, grabs the cutlery. It's great. And then you can actually just defend to protect yourself and have a pretty easy time against most villains. If you can add that burst damage in, you can manage a lot of threats. You can literally manage the threat as well as defend. And so Aggression works really well in Nightcrawler. But in 1st place, we do have Leadership, and him being an X-Men, just that trait on its own, probably could get him to having Leadership at the top. But Kurt can actually play Leadership in so many different archetypes very well. He can go the uncanny route and just flood the field with X-Men, and we all know how strong that is. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful archetype to play. But he also loves Recursion. You can build a recursion around Day Tripper and just use her to recur her, which has an amazing stat line, and then get bamfs, deal damage, and just recur. Just recur multiple times. Or go with a Voltron build. A lot of the times when we're looking up and souping up these allies to create Voltrons out of them, we need a good way to protect them. And that's what Kurt is great at. He's really good at defending. And so you can protect your allies and then build up this Iron Man and just let him do all the damage you need. So any way you really want to build Kurt in blue works really well. And he plays very differently in all different archetypes in blue. So I do actually really like him in blue. Blue is probably my second favorite way to play him, just because of how different he can be. When comparing my rankings with the community rankings, they have protection in first place by far, followed by aggression. And I can totally see that outcome, but I do think true solo protection gets outshined when playing some of the tougher villains, and when you need to apply tempo and need to apply pressure to the villain, he can really struggle that in protection. Let's talk about his overall power ranking. The community places him in the A tier, and this one is pretty tough. Before playing him, I thought he would be one of the strongest solo characters we have, mainly because he is so good at what solo typically struggles with: threat mitigation, damage mitigation. But after playing him, not having damage in his kit is tough. He really does require different gameplay and deck building than a lot of other heroes, which is a really fun puzzle. That being said, a lot of the games I've played with Nightcrawler have gone on for a while, and he can really struggle with the minions. So after many games of me trying to convince myself he deserves a higher ranking, I'm going to put him in the B tier, right behind Star-Lord. I really love Nightcrawler. He is so much fun in the perfect defense build, which is my favorite way to play this game. And so I love Nightcrawler. And even after a pretty rough start, I think I lost like my first 5 games with him, I like that I can still say he's going to be one of my favorite heroes in this entire game. The biggest learning curve for me is understanding his lack of damage, which shifts the typical solo deck building meta. For a lot of heroes, there are big attack events in his kit, which we can rely on to push that damage to the villain, and use the deck building slots to manage threat, shore up weaknesses, and Kurt needs damage. Kurt's weakness is his lack of damage, and so those deck building slots I like to use for damage events or allies with a high damage potential. And so that meta shift in the deck building helped me a lot, because I kept trying to build his deck at the same as I would build any other true solo deck, where I'd be adding in, the really good thwarters and that kind of stuff. Kurt can kind of handle it. His Nemesis set is pretty brutal, especially in Standard 3 when you can trigger Pursue by the Past during a boost phase of a villain activation. Then Azazel will come in and hit you twice for 3, and then you have immediate hazard icon for that extra boost card. I will very much alter my gameplay and make sure I have enough health to survive the encounter phase when there are 3 counters on Pursued. If I don't have a target acquired on the board and there are 3 counters on Pursued by the Past, I'm either flipping down, making sure that I have 7 or more health, because that 3 damage twice, chump block something. You need to have an answer for Azazel, because he will come in and end your game. I think like of those first 5, I think 2 or 3 of them were just from me losing to Azazel. He's such a fun solo hero, and I think he gets even more fun in multiplayer because he is a monster when it comes to multiple heroes at the table. You can put him in green and protect the entire table without really even breaking a sweat. Kurt's Chapel gets super interesting in multiplayer, being able to take some of that damage, knowing you're going to be able to recover and be safer taking that recovery action than in a true solo game. Then you get to pass out a card to the teammate who most needs it, and you can just kind of be Santa Claus, right? Pass out cards. And sometimes that extra resource can be a turning point for a bomb turn by a teammate, and communication at the table and understanding where everybody is in their build. And if you can pass that critical card to somebody, it's a very good feeling. Also in multiplayer, you don't have to worry too much about finding damage for the villain. You can kind of rely on your teammates for that, because everyone in a multiplayer build kind of specializes rather than tries to diversify. And so if you have the aggression player at the table that is going to be throwing a lot of damage at the villain or taking out those minions, you can rely on your teammates for that, and you can just lean into being a defensive beast for the table. I think that was an unintended pun, and I still really want Beast in this game. But anyways, he can play most aspects well in multiplayer. I know that. That being said, personally, I don't know if I'm ever going to not play him in green. It's just so perfect for what I enjoy about this game that I don't see myself playing Nightcrawler. I don't get to play a ton of multiplayer games, and so when I do, and I'm playing Nightcrawler, I'm playing him in green. It's just going to be so good for the table there. So there it is. That is Nightcrawler, the newest champion in Marvel Champions. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about Nightcrawler down in the video comments. I'd love to talk about him because I think he's really interesting. I thought going into it, he was going to be the strongest hero one of the strongest heroes in the game. Just like the printed abilities on his card just seem like a true solo player's dream. 2 thwart, 3 defense, get up to 4 defense in his own kit. Really easy threat removal from his events. He just seems really good. And so after playing him a little bit, there's a little bit of that like requires some deck building around, and I'm glad that he's not S tier, right? I think we have, I think the B tier heroes are some of the most interesting heroes to play. And so I'm also curious if you agree with me on the B tier. It's a pretty low ranking. It's much lower than I thought. So let me know. Do you, I mean, like from the community poll, where we differ, and so I would be curious to hear how you think and would rank him as either B or higher or lower. So let me know down in the comments. Appreciate you watching. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I will see you next time. Peace.